And an essential characteristic of marriage on all these levels is it's got to be voluntary. He describes it in Married Love, number 61. He says, there's a union of goodness and truth in everything that has been created, both in general and in particular. So everything, this shows up everywhere. This union cannot exist unless it is mutual. For any union that is made by one party only and not by the other in return dissolves of its own accord. This is why there is such a thing as free will, why there is the potential to not follow God if you want, because otherwise there could not be this mutuality and we couldn't follow this pattern. So, is this starting to make sense, the different levels of it? Hopefully you're nodding in front of your computer. So if we see that on these higher levels with the divine love and wisdom together, the Lord and the church in us, it needs to be mutual. In those cases, we should see the same kind of need for mutuality in marriages, in just like regular old between spouses. And you do. And don't take it from me though, we got a psychologist to talk about that a bit.
First of all, I love the idea of consent for marriage. I mean, in contrast to some places in the world where there are arranged marriages or child brides where the girl very often doesn't have a lot of choice or she's too young to make a really adult choice. And so Swedenborg really talks about how important it is for there to be mutual consent between a man and a woman in a marriage. And I like this idea of how we keep showing up every day, choosing, feeling in freedom, to improve the relationship every day, build on whatever happened in the past, whether it was terrible or wonderful, but that we should still feel that we are in freedom to do that. And knowing that the two parties are different from each other, and yet they have shared things, like they may have children they're still trying to nurture, or they are sharing their finances, or they're sharing their household. They are serving the community in some way, and that they are doing this together. It doesn't mean they have to be losing their identity in the process. In fact, psychologists often talk about how important it is for people to feel like they are contributing to a relationship, but also aware of what the other person needs and wants.
So consent, and you'll find that across psychology. But while we've got her on the line, let's look a little bit into how the good and the true principles show up in marriage and in psychology, and give you a little bit of application here so that you can use in your own relationships.
So, for instance, I'm also thinking about this echoing of the marriage and good and truth in terms of what psychologists use. Their language is a little different, but there's some harmony to what we're talking about here. For instance, one of the most well-known ways of doing therapy these days is called cognitive behavior therapy. And that's really a balance of paying attention to our feelings. What are we thinking? What are we doing? Very similar to what Swedenborg says. So when we are in a marriage, I also like to think about what are we thinking, what are we feeling, and what are we doing. And sometimes we have to alter one of those in order to have a healthy feeling. So it's not enough to just say, I'm going to stop feeling angry at my husband. Instead, we need to figure out, how can I understand his point of view? What behaviors can I do that will feed the relationship? Maybe the way I provide meals for him, or the way I listen to him, or we go do something fun together. Those are all going to feed the relationship at all those three levels, and then also receiving that from him as well. The irony is, of course, that our physical appearance is usually more beautiful when we're in our 20s and 30s. And that's very often when relationships start. And our bodies get grayer and heavier and wrinkly, and we live in a culture that longs to have that physical beauty. I get that. But what's interesting is that, ironically, as the physical may become less and less beautiful, I really admire couples that seem to have a mutual appreciation for the inner qualities of the other person. For instance, I love that my husband really has certain moral standards that he really likes to live by. That matters so much more than whether or not he's bald and has fuzzy gray hair on the edges. I love that he is dedicated to being a dutiful, useful member of society in his job and in his volunteer work. He just shows up every day doing that. And I really love that he's faithful to the marriage. And that matters so much more after years and years. With all the distractions out there of materialism and people being unfaithful, it matters so much more. And so there's much more for me to love about my husband now than there was even 40 years ago, when we both physically looked a little more like the ideal that Hollywood portrays. So moving from external qualities to internal qualities and appreciating them in the other really, really matters. But that's a choice. We can choose to pay attention to those things, or we can choose to not. And that, to me, is what makes a really fabulous marriage evolve and get more and more genuine. And I think it's a preparation for the next world. I do believe in marriage after we die, and I think it's our inner qualities that really shine in the next world. But we can start to appreciate them here.